Garrison, lovely. Thank you so much for joining us on Novara Media.
Great to be here.
Let's start with this open letter. How big a deal is this? Is this sort of genuinely workers in these companies trying to save the world? Or is this another PR stunt, perhaps?
I think it's not a PR stunt. I think it is a big deal. I also think it doesn't go far enough. But the story is basically that now over 1,200 employees of frontier AI companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and others asked the US government to support an international effort to develop the technical and governance tools needed to deliberately pace the frontier of automated AI development. So kind of a complicated sentence and something that was probably worked over by a lot of comms departments at these companies, because the official OpenAI and Anthropic accounts actually shared this on Twitter. But basically they're saying like, hey, we need the ability to pump the brakes or to slow AI capabilities progress internationally, because these companies and people like Sam Altman, Dario Amodei have argued that, look, it's going to be the US or China winning this AI race. And if you want democracy to win, then you need to invest in the United States and we need to move fast. And I have written about like the flaws in that thinking. But I think the notable thing is that like, if you have international guardrails that are binding between the two superpowers here, it actually like undercuts that argument a lot. And at the same time, you need international guardrails between those two countries to avoid things that neither country or no country wants, such as, rogue states or rogue groups having access to superhuman hackers or potentially superhuman bioengineers that could create novel bioweapons. We're in a world where like cyber capabilities became superhuman first. And that's scary, but it's also like not as bad as if suddenly like the models got really good at coaching a novice through building a bioweapon, something that nobody should want. So we're going to need guardrails, and this is like a big step toward that. The reason it doesn't go far enough is because I think it's democratically illegitimate to be pursuing what they want, which is universal labor replacing machines. And that was true before the latest AI safety incident. It also just happens to be unsafe, but we didn't need another reason to stop what's happening now.
Let's take a step back, actually, because, we discuss AI a lot on this show, and still sort of a large part of the audience, very understandably, are in the camp that this is all hot air, partly because you see this sort of cognitive dissonance. If you've got these AI CEOs who are saying this really could kill everyone, but also I'm going to keep working on it. And there is something inherently suspicious about that. They are also trying to keep their stock prices up, trying to keep their valuations up for the ones that haven't gone public yet. I know you're very much sort of in this debate. So sort of you're someone on the left, you write for Jacobin, or you've written for Jacobin, and you think that this is a big deal. You think that they're not bluffing, but also that they do need to be held to account. So I suppose just position yourself in that debate for us, please.
Yeah, it's a tricky needle to thread, and I totally get the skepticism of like, wait, you say this is so dangerous, it could kill everybody, and yet you're still building it. But their justification is that like, well, look, if we don't do it, if OpenAI doesn't do it, Anthropic or Google will do it. And if we, American industry, don't do it, then Chinese industry will do it. And I think the first one, it's like clearly there are a number of American AI companies that are gunning for what they call artificial general intelligence, what I call the obsoleting project, which is trying to render us all obsolete. They really do believe that this will happen. And in fact, they think it's inevitable. And once you accept that it's inevitable, then it's all a question of who does it and how they do it. And I push back on the inevitability frame, but I also push back on the impossibility frame, which is adopted by many people on the left. And my claim is not that it's definitely possible or definitely will happen, but just that we can't rule it out. And the stakes are way too high to get it wrong, because if you err in the direction of not taking it seriously, but it's actually possible and happens in the next few years, then everything is up for grabs, including like the total disempowerment of all workers and potentially all people forever. And so this letter is a big step towards saying it's not inevitable that we move as fast as possible, which is a like foot in the door to actually slowing or stopping the race. And if you stop it for any amount of time, I think it's a lot easier to see how it stops for a much longer period of time because you'll have the mechanism internationally and institutionally to pump the brakes.
I mean, at the same time, I suppose to go back to the cynicism, and this is a different kind of cynicism, because I'm with you on this being a very big deal. I don't think they're just making up the fact that this is a revolutionary technology. But in terms of the significance of this letter, I suppose where I have doubts is, I mean, first of all, when I initially saw this story, I thought this was maybe a more grassroots thing. So it's sort of the workers against the management, perhaps. But clearly, when you've got people like Dario Amodei signing it, as you say, it's sort of been shared by the OpenAI and Anthropic accounts. It's something which is more sort of integral to the management of these companies. And they're smart people, right? And they know that the president of the United States is Donald Trump. They know that Donald Trump is not in any rush to regulate AI. They know that Donald Trump is not in any rush to come to any kind of agreement with China. And when it comes to practical regulations that are being put forward in Congress, most of these companies, especially OpenAI, they fund super PACs to campaign against candidates who genuinely want to regulate AI. So my negative read on this, if I were to put one forward, is that they know this isn't going to happen. They know they have a very powerful technology which could cause lots of damage. But in the case that it causes lots of damage in the near future, they want to be able to say, well, we did ask to be regulated, so don't blame us. Blame the US government or the failure of the Americans and the Chinese to come to some form of treaty agreement. Do you differ from that perspective? I mean, you seem sort of less cynical than me about this letter at the moment.
I think that the politics of this are moving very fast. And the relevant context here is that a pair of OpenAI models that are specialized in hacking broke out of OpenAI, hacked their way out of their supposedly secure environment, hopped around a bunch of OpenAI servers until they got access to the internet, hacked into a company, used that as a staging ground to hack into another company, this one being a multi-billion-dollar software company, to get answers to a test that they had been given on cybersecurity. And they demonstrated, I think what is fair to say is like superhuman hacking capabilities in both speed and like the number of novel vulnerabilities they found and exploited. Also, AIs have disproven major things in mathematics that have been worked over by many mathematicians for decades. In the last week, the latest thing is Claude found some, errors or like vulnerabilities in some cryptography approaches that people have been using. And this is just like, once breakthroughs start happening in a field, you can expect more and more over time because that's just how the technology has tended to work. And so, yeah, like 2 weeks ago, this same statement would ring as like, oh yeah, like that's not going to happen anytime soon. But right now, you're seeing people in the media and government kind of being like, what is going on? Like the AIs are already hacking their way out of their companies and then hacking into other companies, and maybe could have hacked into any company, given what we know about how good they've gotten at cyber defense, cyber offense. And so I really like, it's also notable that, Google DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis, I don't think signed this letter. I don't think Google formally supported it. That's, a publicly traded company. Senior employees at Google did. But I think, OpenAI says that they paused training of new models, which is a huge deal because that's the way these companies work. Like they train bigger and better models all the time, and then they deploy them and they, keep advancing the frontier. And, Sam Altman said this. He's not known for his honesty. But if he were lying, it would like get out, I think, pretty clearly. So I think we're kind of in novel territory here. And yeah, I think that like you could see this as a way to moderate or milquetoast kind of demand. But given who it's coming from, I think, the US government, Congress, they listen to these companies, right? Like when they want to know what to do about AI, Chuck Schumer is like calling up Sam Altman and, talking to industry. And so if industry is like, hey, we need to have some kind of binding international rules, that's great. That's like a foot in the door. And then it's up to the rest of us who don't have these conflicts of interest to say, okay, and the rule should say, don't replace us. Don't let them build universal labor replacing machines. And the reason that's not happening is because people are not aware that that's what they're trying to do, or they don't think the industry might succeed, or they don't think that we can stop it. But I think it's becoming more and more clear that that's what they're gunning for. it might work and that we can and we should stop it.
Yeah, let's take another step back, actually. So your argument is that they're trying to make us obsolete with these machines, which is, I suppose, slightly different from some of the existential risk arguments, which is to say, this is a technology which has, which could be fantastic as long as it doesn't do the thing we don't want it to do, which is kill us all. Which I suppose is more the Sam Altman position, right? That these are, and the Elon Musk position, which is these are tools which are going to bring about a form of radical abundance, which is going to give us all brilliant qualities of life, so long as we can avoid the apocalypse. That seems to be their argument. And one response is to say, well, if the apocalypse is even sort of a 10% risk, I'm not willing to risk it for the radical abundance. You're saying that even if it goes well, on their terms, the outcome is negative for all of us. So I suppose, could you cash that out?
Yeah, I think it was just, I wrote this book recently and I was spending a lot of time thinking through the scenarios. And so I have this chapter called the best case scenario, which is like they build machines that can make labor, and the machines can make labor better and cheaper and faster than humans. And in this world, the machines just do what their developers and users ask of them. And I was like, okay, what happens after that? And it's like, well, you'll have like hyper-capitalism. You'll have what the industry describes as like potentially a compressed 21st century where you automate the entire process of scientific discovery and engineering. So you have like 100 years of technological progress potentially in a decade. And a ton of people describe this as a positive thing, like leaders in the industry. The possibility of mass surveillance that is nearly perfect and killer robots that can allow a single leader to give an order that will never be refused by conscientious objectors, which is one of the primary ways that dictators fall, is when the soldiers refuse to fire on the protesters. And the fundamental thing is like, you have to think about who will have access to these machines and to more of them, right? Like the people in kind of AI safety world, or the ones who are optimistic about the technology, a bunch of them are benevolent techno-utopians who just want everybody in the world to have like an amazing life. Like everyone on the planet, all the poorest people to live better than the richest people in the richest countries today. And they have like a roadmap in their head of how that works. But the thing that they're missing is power. What would Stephen Miller do with this technology? That question is so much more relevant to how it goes than like what Berkeley-based, techno-utopian would do with it. Because Stephen Miller is going to have access to way more of it than the people who like want to actually just solve poverty. And so that's a terrifying world. And then there's just like the losing control of the whole, system, like losing control of the machines as OpenAI just did, but not just a few machines for a week or more, but like potentially losing control to the machines. And that's not happening this year or next year. Like that's a multi-year away thing. And so my kind of demand is like, yes, it's unsafe to build these machines under the present circumstances, but it's also undemocratic. And the industry and the people who want to build them should be forced to show how it goes well for everybody, which they would have to do if there was like, a network of citizens' assemblies around the world that like had to approve moving forward towards universal labor replacing machines. Like they would have to make their case and explain all the question marks right now in their plan that ends in utopia. And I think it's just simple and like, I want the onus to be on them. They should have to justify why they get to move forward with this thing that will affect everybody forever if they succeed without our buy-in.
And I suppose they would say that this has never been demanded of any technology before. When we mechanized manufacturing, they didn't have to sort of get consent from any citizens' assembly. When we mechanized sort of the production of fabric, that didn't happen. So why should they? And I suppose your argument is that there's something so fundamental about this technology that the rules have to be different.
Yeah, I think the case is just that this technology is fundamentally different from past technologies, at least the hypothesized version of it they're trying to build. And, permissionless innovation in most respects, like should be the default, I think. I think that's like reasonable to say, given that you don't really know in advance. Like a lot of people have predicted that like recombinant DNA techniques in the 70s were seen as like very scary. And these scientists got together and said like, hey, we want a moratorium on doing this type of research till we figure out some rules for them. And they actually did it. And it's like really noble that they did that. Turned out it wasn't actually that risky. And so the kind of like pro-innovation people will point to things like that and be like, oh, you're just fear-mongering and you're missing out on all this good stuff. And I'm just like, look, we don't know if it's possible to build these machines, but everyone who said it isn't possible has made predictions and observations that don't really hold up. Like they'll say it won't get better at whatever, and then it almost always does. And that thing, like, just would actually be categorically different from every other past invention in the universality of its effects and the irreversibility of its existence. So, you know, people sometimes talk about like carving out like regulatory kind of islands where workers are protected. You know, maybe the state or country says like, you can't use the labor replacing machines here. And that just won't work in the medium to long run because the economic activity will just go wherever the machines are most permitted. Because if capital can fully substitute for labor, which is what these companies are trying to build, is that ability, then the capital will go wherever it's easiest for the capital to do that. And then the economic activity will grow around it. Like Shenzhen in southern China, like it was like a fishing village like 30 years ago. And now it's like one of the biggest cities in the world because it was a special economic zone. And you were able to just do things that you weren't able to do elsewhere. And so like that will just happen, but to a much larger degree. And so it's not like a thing that people can just kind of avoid by carving out a little niche for themselves, because the machines will just make more stuff and they'll make it better and cheaper than humans, or at least so much cheaper, even if it's worse at first, that wherever it exists will eventually devalue the wage labor of people everywhere.
Let's end by going back to this letter and just, I suppose, the practicability of it, if we are to sort of take it seriously at its word. What would some kind of pacing agreement between the Americans and the Chinese look like? I mean, has anyone sort of laid that out in a way that you find sort of persuasive and realistic?
I mean, so in the book, I describe how you could have a bilateral treaty between the US and China that pauses or halts research towards the universal labor replacing machines. It's actually a lot easier to say like no more frontier AI research, right? Than to say like, okay, it has to happen, but like 50% as fast. And so the main mechanism though is something like, you know, one country establishes some kind of mechanism for stopping or slowing domestically. Like the US could easily just tell all these AI companies to stop training new models that are bigger than what came before. There's like 3 companies that can do this. And so it'd be pretty easy to just like put a bunch of auditors in there, like they're in the Slack, they're in the email, they're in the offices, and they just get to see like what all the computing power is being used for. And I was like, okay, no training runs bigger than, you know, this certain amount. And then China could obviously do this domestically and would have an easier time of it. The trick is to like make that international. And the way you can do that is through verification that requires zero trust between either party, right? So the US says we can't trust China. China says we can't trust the United States. They're both right. So you need to have things like neutral data centers with cryptographic commitments about like what is happening like in the data center that doesn't reveal like the underlying model weights or the secrets of the countries that built the thing. Or you can have like chips that have these like devices on them that can verify facts about what's happening on the chips without revealing the underlying stuff. There's like multiple technical approaches that you can take here. There's also institutional approaches. You could build like an international agency that exists for this, that it's like governed by like third-party countries. And people have laid this out. And I can send a link to one of the proposals here. And like once you can verify these things to a significant degree, you can kind of like make any rules international. And there's still more work that needs to be done on the technical and institutional level. I think this is a step toward that because, again, it's in everybody's interest to have some kind of rules internationally about this tech. And then from there, I think it's actually just so much easier and more sensible to just be like, no more frontier AI research than to say like, okay, we'll slow it down by some fraction, because that actually seems pretty hard to define and enforce.
Garrison, lovely. Thank you so much for joining me on Novara Media. Really great to talk.
Yeah, this is super fun. Thanks for having me.